Hello, people of the internet, and especially those people interested in Serverpod. Serverpod 2.0.0 just released the other day, 4 days ago at the time of this recording. I really love Serverpod. I've done a few videos on it, and it's very much still in some ways in its infancy, but it is, in my opinion, completely production ready. I can't say I've used it on a client project yet, but I built some cool internal things that, everything works, and it's really great. However, still a lot more that they are working on, and they have some great plans. And this 2.0, although there's not any really new features, I'd say, like the 1.2, I'd say was like a really big change compared to 2.0. This cleaned up a lot of things and kind of set the path for what is coming, as you'll see in the changelog here. So what I have in mind is there's a lot to Serverpod, and there's a lot I've learned about it doing various things. There's a lot that I've had to relearn because things have changed, and always for the better so far. Big picture, I'm planning on putting together a bit of a masterclass on Serverpod, going through, everything at least, that has come across for me in my hobby apps and ones that, hopefully will come between now and then. However, I'm not ready to do that full thing yet. So what I'm doing, I'm picking one, very specific topic. And in this case, it is creating a custom user in Serverpod, because that is something that, I think most apps need. You don't just want to rely on the built-in like UserInfo. We'll still be using that, but that's more to do with like your authentication and the very core things that need to be in a user. But a lot of the times your user also might have to have a bio or various other things, depending on your application. And I think I found a good way to do it. There's not necessarily specific docs that say how to do this exactly. So I've kind of played with a few different approaches and, following still the Serverpod practices and what they're doing for relationships. All that being said, I'm excited to kind of get this started. Now, recently, my most recent Serverpod series, very much, although it was Serverpod on the back end, it was a clean architecture video, and it very much focused on the front end of the application. There's obviously still some back-end stuff, getting Serverpod figured out, creating like the normal CRUD stuff. But my goal for this video, and probably other videos related to this, is I'm going to spend as much time on the Serverpod back-end part of things, as well as the parts in Flutter that we need to do that is relevant to Serverpod. But I'm not going to be spending much time on, Flutter architecture. I'm going to be actually challenging myself to do things almost poorly on Flutter. I don't want to be adding things like Riverpod or Block. I want this to be agnostic, that you can bring your own state management or your own patterns, use clean architecture, use solid, don't use stateful components, whatever. So there's going to be some messy stuff on there, and I'll be alluding to that when we go, but it's because I don't want to waste people's time learning something. This is how you would do it in Riverpod if you don't care about Riverpod. So we're going to give you that stuff really basic. There'll be a lot of just me copying and pasting stuff and quickly walking it through when it comes to that, whereas I'll be a lot more in-depth on the Serverpod side. So that's sort of the preamble for this. Let's get into it. So first things first, we want to make sure we have Serverpod up to date with the latest one, 2.0.0. I already do, but in case you haven't installed Serverpod at all, or you're on an older version, we can simply just install it. So let's actually just go to the docs here. I'll open up their website, and sorry, that's not the website. I have it over here, and we'll go to the docs. And we'll see this lovely installation thing, so let's just run this. And this is safe to run, even if you already think you might have the latest. It'll either just tell you everything's good, and which it's doing for me right now. But yeah, we're on 2.0.0. Awesome. So now we're going to do Serverpod. And we can just, again, follow this. Somewhere in here it says, but Serverpod create, and we're going to create our application. So we'll just run Serverpod create and then the name of our app. I will just call this SP user, Serverpod user. But of course you would use this however, whatever your app name would be. So we'll let that all go. And we'll just run Serverpod create, and then the name of our app. I will just call this SP user, Serverpod user. But of course, you would use this however, whatever your app name would be. So we'll let that all go. And we'll let that all go. And this is just basically kind of bootstrapping the project and generating some random passwords and stuff like that that are going to be used. And let's just go into that directory and open it fully in VS Code. All right, here we are in VS Code. Now, what we're going to do first is just get our Docker instance built and running. Now, if you don't have Docker, just go and download it, Google it, download it for your operating system, and just make sure it's running. I have it running, yeah, right here. Look, little Docker. And we're going to go, so we're going to go into the the server part of our application so that we can run this command. So we're just going to run this sp user server. And within here, we're going to just run docker compose. And then we're going to add a -- build and -- detach. And sorry, one thing I forgot, it's docker compose up with those flags. So docker compose up, we want to build and we want to detach from it. We don't want it to just keep running in the terminal, because then as soon as we close the terminal, it will be gone. So that's the reason for detached. So you'll see it did some things, and if we go to Docker now, we'll actually see our sp user server, and 2 things are running, and we'll see in here there is a Postgres database and Redis. Okay, that's great. So now that's running, we can make sure everything is good. We can simply go dart bin / main.dart. So this is just pointing to essentially bin, our main application here. And this just runs the run command, which does a lot of other stuff under the hood. It's basically going into the lib server and using this as your configuration and going and starting our server. So let's just try to run that just to see if everything is looking good. Now we're getting some errors, and that is because this error specifically is because I think I have Serverpod running in another terminal, but we should be good now. So now the error that we're having is to be expected. I was expecting this one because it's telling me there's some issues with the relation of stuff. So this is like a database sort of issue. So because we have this fresh database, there's nothing in it yet. It's just an empty database. We actually have to run some migrations. So what we can actually do is dart bin main.dart and then go -- apply migrations. And this will essentially start it up, but before we actually run it, it will apply the migrations to the database. And these will just be the migrations that came with Serverpod to start. And now we're up and running and everything is good. Great. So what we want to do next, because we're going to be talking about users, we need to get the auth module installed. So auth doesn't come, although it's a first-party library for Serverpod, it does not, come already installed, because there's cases you might not need it. You might not need auth in your application. It might be just a fully public thing without users. So it makes sense that they don't just include it baked in. So what we're going to do is I'm going to close this, Control-C, and we're going to run dart pub add serverpod auth server. So this is just a package that they created that's also on pubdev. You can look it up if you like, and this will add some things. Now, something that's good to do anytime you're adding Serverpod related pieces to your code, packages, you'll see it gets added to the pub spec as you would expect. But you'll see Serverpod is specifically saying, hey, use 2.0.0. There's no little caret character here, because you don't want this to just automatically update if there was one that came out, because it might not be stable. There might be something that your code doesn't use. So it's nice to just pick it, and then in the future, if you notice an update, to go and do the same thing. Now, when we're doing a pub add, it's going to always add this caret. So we want to actually remove this here, just so that we know we're using these things that are compatible. Because if we had 2.0.0 of Serverpod, but maybe 2.1.0 of the auth server, they might not be compatible with each other. So let's just set these to this. And I've noticed, at least when Serverpod puts in updates, they're always updating all their things at once with the same version. So if there's an update, you should be able to safely just update them and keep them the same. So let's just do that. And we'll see nothing really is going to change because this is still the latest one. Okay, now that was what we had to do in our server folder to get this going. In our client folder, we'll just go back a directory and go into client. We're going to do something pretty similar, except instead of doing Serverpod auth server, we're using Serverpod auth client. Now you might be wondering, if this is your first time checking out Serverpod, what is the client? It's pretty obvious what the server is. I think it's pretty obvious what the Flutter is. Client is kind of like the bridge that is between these two things. It is a lot of just code generation. You never really change anything in there except for maybe some configuration or what we just did now, adding a package. But it's kind of like the glue that creates the API between these things so that you don't have to really think about building an API on either side of the application. So yeah, not a lot goes on in here from a developer's point of view, unless you're a developer at Serverpod or a contributor. But it is a very important part of Serverpod, and it's without it, the whole point of Serverpod kind of goes away. Because that's what Serverpod offers, this great glue between your backend and your front end with type safety and all that stuff. So yeah, we don't really have to worry about looking at the code in here, but similarly, we're going to open the pub spec and we're going to set this also to 2.0.0. Lastly, we're going to go into the Flutter directory, and we're all familiar with the Flutter directory. It is a basic Flutter application. It's almost, verbatim the application that comes when you just do a Flutter create. The only difference is the example file is a little bit different because it's giving you an example in Serverpod. We can look at that real quick. Main.dart, and we see, it's that typical sort of thing. My homepage, it's just different code because they want to show off, what you're doing, what you could do with Serverpod. So inside the Flutter directory now, we're going to be adding two packages. We are going to be adding the Serverpod auth shared Flutter, and we're also going to be adding Serverpod auth email Flutter, which just gives us the ways to do easily create an account with email using their built-in mechanisms. You could, if you wanted to, go a little bit further, and there's a similar package for connecting with Google. I believe there's also one for your Apple sort of one, but we're just going to be worrying about email for this to keep things simple. In a future video, I'm sure we will explore, setting up those sorts of things. Okay, and, similarly in our pub spec, let's look for those right here. We see that they got installed with the caret, so we will just change that. Again, just to keep these things always consistent. We don't want this to update without this. We want to kind of be in charge of doing that. All right. The next thing I'd like to do, and this is optional, you could get away with this, but this is just a nice thing to do to make our code a little bit cleaner, is if we go into Serverpod server, and then we go into the config folder, and then the generator.yaml, what we can do is we can actually give an alias to our Serverpod auth. So we can just go modules, and then we can go Serverpod auth, which is normally what we'd have to call it, but instead we can give it a nickname. So we can say nickname and just call it auth, because we don't want to enter code everywhere in Flutter to say, client.serverpod_auth or whatever it would be, dot whatever. This will just allow us to use the word auth throughout all of our code, as well as in our configuration files. So we're going to do that as well. Now, because we installed this new module, we'll go back to our server directory, and we need to create a migration. And what this will do is it will essentially create the SQL and whatnot to change our database, to add these new tables, all that kind of stuff. So we can simply run serverpod create-migration. We'll see a migration was created. And let's just take a look at this for fun. If we go to migrations, it'll be this last one here. We can see there's some definitions about what it is. We can see the migration JSON data. So, okay, it's adding this, create this table called auth key with these columns and so on and so forth. And we can also see even the SQL that is going to get run. And what's great is we don't actually have to run this. In previous versions, I think 1.2, it would give you this code, and then you would have to open up a database terminal, and you'd have to paste it in. And then if you wanted to make a change, you'd have to figure out kind of like, oh, how can I actually just make this change without affecting my data, or just decide to wipe it. But honestly, having migrations is a huge plus for Serverpod. And we don't have to worry about this. We don't have to run this. It's going to run automatically, semi-automatically. So the next thing we're going to do, because we've made some other changes, is we want to run something called Serverpod generate. So this isn't generating anything to do with the database. We've already created the migration. This will actually update our SP user client folder with some generated code based on these new modules. This is also something you can safely run. You could run it 100 times in a row, and it'll be fine. You don't have to be like, oh, did I change anything? You know, I just ran it. There's a chance I didn't have to run it in this case, but I'm pretty sure because of these new packages, it makes sense to run it. Lastly, we're going to do something we've already done before. We're going to start our server, but we're going to apply migrations. So this is going to take those new migrations that essentially we had and actually apply them before starting up the server. So now we're good. Our database is great. Now let's take a quick peek at how we can kind of look at our database, because without tools like this, you know, it's sometimes hard to visualize what's going on just looking at raw SQL. So I have this application called dbeaver, so database beaver, I guess. And although there's lots of tools like this one is, there's a free version, it's open source, it works on all platforms. So that's the one I'm using. And essentially you can create a new connection. And basically what you need to do here is put in localhost as your host. Your database will be whatever your project name was. You can double check that just by looking at your development.yaml, and you'll see in here, database localhost. You also have to change the port because it's not using the default Postgres port. The name, like I said, is going to be the name of our project, and the user is this. Now for the password, you're going to go into your passwords folder, file, and underneath development, you're going to find your database password right there. So you'll want to include that as well. You know, click test connection. Yep, we are good. And then we'll click OK. So we're going to now connect to this, and we're going to go to databases. Oh, wait, what happened here? We'll open that up and we'll see SP user. And we can go into our public schema, and we can see all the tables. So some of these tables we just actually got in that second migration, like the auth key one as an example, as well as all these ones that say email. And we can look at one of these. Let's see, maybe Serverpod log will have some data in it. So these are the columns of it. And if we actually click on the data tab, we'll see any data. It doesn't look like there's anything we haven't really done much yet. That kind of makes sense. But yeah, this is a nice way, especially if you're debugging something, you know, get a tool like this. I also, DataGrip is probably my favorite of these similar tools. It's made by JetBrains. The only thing is it does have a cost. So I wanted to show something, you know, free that still does what, you know, I think works. Okay. There we go. All right, now we get into the heart of this tutorial where we actually start creating our custom user. So what we're going to do here is we are going to go into our lib folder, source, models. And you'll see there's an example model here. And this is actually a model that doesn't even have a database associated with it, or a database table rather. And we can kind of see, okay, there's some fields you can put in, cool. But we're going to make a new one, and we're going to just call it user.spy.yaml. Now the reason for .spy, that actually just stands for Serverpod YAML. Its really only purpose, instead of just being a YAML, is so that if you have the Serverpod extension, which I do, you'll actually get IntelliSense and errors and linting and stuff in this file. So what we want to do now is we're going to create the name of our model, and we're going to call it user, just like we would in Flutter, Pascal case, uppercase for the first letter. Then we're going to give it a table name, and we'll just call the table user. You could call it users if you wanted, but generally it seems to me the pattern in Serverpod is singular, and that is actually kind of a old school proper way, in my opinion, of doing database table names, the singular version of it. Then we're going to create some fields. So one of the fields we're going to want is going to be a bio. And this is basically going to be our example of something that's custom. Of course, you can go in here and, you know, you could add things like social handles or, you know, whatever you want. But we need to have at least one thing. Otherwise, the whole point of this tutorial is kind of useless. We need something. So I'm just using bio. Again, you can do whatever you want. You can make other things. It's all good. Now, you might be thinking, what about email? What about their name? That's all stuff that's going to come from the actual, what's called the UserInfo, which is part of our auth module. And actually, I believe if we look in dbeaver, we can get a sense of what that might look like by going back to our, let's just open this again, public. There should be UserInfo here. And we can see there's things like an ID, a user identifier, a username, a full name, an email, when it was created, their image URL, blah, 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 blah. So we're still going to have access to that. That's the point. This is kind of just something that's going to augment and add extra data that we can customize. So that's all good, but we need something that's going to link this to that user. So what we're going to create is something called UserInfo, and we're actually going to point this to a different table, and in fact, a different table in a totally different module. So in order to do that, we actually do module auth. Remember, we named it auth, and we can go UserInfo, because that's the type of data it's going to be. It's UserInfo, but we can't just use UserInfo. We have to kind of like put in this namespace right here. What we also want to do is we want to make sure that what's being stored in here is a relationship. If we were just to do it this way, it would work for a bit, but as soon as something changed in the UserInfo, this data would actually be rasterized in this table of whatever it was at that point. So we'd have to manage two different places. We just essentially want to say, like, use this UserInfo, but get it from somewhere else and keep them in sync. So we have to put the word relation here with a comma separating them. And I'm going to do this one first, just because it's kind of, to me, the most important piece of the puzzle, because it connects the dots. So that's good. Lastly, and this is, I think, mostly for performance purposes, we actually want to create an index on this so that it's easier for quick lookups and stuff like that, so that we can very easily get this data from just passing in the ID based on this. So what we actually do is we're going to make a index called UserInfo ID unique index, but I'm just going to do IDX instead of index. And in here, we have to do our fields. And for the fields, the ones we're going to use are actually UserInfo ID. Now, we haven't made that. We've just made UserInfo, but because it's a relationship to this, this has an ID, and it's called UserInfo ID, and everything will work. And you'll see I don't even have, it's really nice how this is giving me an error here, but as soon as I actually correct it, it's telling me it's right. So definitely get the extension. If you just go to your extensions, search for Serverpod, you'll see Serverpod. Just install that, and everything is great. Lastly, we want to make sure for this use case that unique is true, because we only want one user per UserInfo. If we have multiple, that's going to become a problem. This is basically just a one-to-one relationship as opposed to like a foreign key, one-to-many, many-to-many. So we're going to save that. So now we've created this, which is pretty cool. And this is all we need for our model to essentially exist, both in the dark code, but also in the database. So we're going to follow a similar step that we did before. And I should still have this in my history. We'll just do Serverpod. First of all, let's do, create migration first. So this will actually create the migration. And again, if we look at this, we should have a third one in here now. And if we go to migration.json, we'll see it's creating a table called, it's going to be called user, the name of the table. And here's the things in it. There's going to be an ID, because every model in Serverpod has an ID. It's a Postgres database. We're going to have an ID in each row. Then we have the user info ID, and we have the bio. You'll see that we don't actually have a representation of user info. It's really just a link to it's a relationship, and you'll see the foreign key in here. Here's the constraints and all the stuff that we don't really have to worry about. We just look at it and go, wow, these devs did something awesome for us. Now, the next thing we want to do is we're going to run the Serverpod generate, because we have this new model. We want to make sure that our client has the updated code for it, and everything looks good there. Then we still need to apply that migration. We've generated it, but we need to apply it. So we'll run main.dart and then -- apply migrations and hope everything works. So if we go back to dbeaver now, and let's just go back to our public, and I need to just see how to refresh this. Maybe we'll just go through it again. Hopefully it'll refresh it. Let's see, it's not here yet. I just had to figure out how to refresh. That's how you do it, refresh. Sorry, this isn't my normal tool. Again, just wanted to do something pretty open and free. So we'll see our user table. Yeah, and here we have our ID, user info ID, and bio. Awesome. We are good. Okay, cool. Now, a couple other things we have to do on the server side. We're going to open up our server.dart, which we haven't really looked at this file yet, but this is essentially what bootstraps our app when we run this command, and kind of has everything listening. So we have, the Serverpod pod being set. There's some sort of like web routes here that we could potentially remove some static stuff, and then the pod starts and everything's good and it just chills and waits for requests. However, we need to add something here, or a couple things actually. So first off, and this is new in 2.0. If you're using even 1.2 and beyond, this is a change that I noticed. We actually we have to add an authentication handler right in this configuration. So in order to do that, first of all, we have to import that auth module that we made. So we're going to just import it. But we're gonna create an alias for it. So we're importing, Serverpod auth server, which we installed at the start of this video, auth. Then here we're gonna do authentication handler, and we're gonna use auth.authentication handler. And we can actually just get rid of this because the authentication handler follows the same shape. You'll see this, as a function session string, and so is this function here. So rather than just calling it, we can just pass reference to it. Okay, then we're going to do a couple other things here. So we need to configure our auth now. And there's a whole bunch of cool configuration, which, we'll get into some of it as we go. But auth config.set. And in here, we need to pass in auth.authconfig. And we put in our configuration info. All this stuff I'm showing you here, or at least initial, is right in the docs if you're following along. If you prefer that, just go to the authentication module and you will see. So two important things we need are, anytime a user signs up, we need to send them a confirmation code to basically prove they own that email. So to do that, and I'm just going to paste this in because this is very much from the docs, we just have to do send validation email where we have access to the session, which session in Serverpod on the back end, you can think of it kind of like the build context of the server. It has a bunch of good information in it so that it can work with it. Then there's the email. This is the email address that's actually used. And then it's also going to generate a validation code for us. And in this place, this is where we would say, okay, I'm going to send send the email. Now for sending email, we would have to install something or use, an API like Mailgun or, various other things like that, SendGrid. But for our purposes now, we're just going to print the validation code out so that when we create our account, we can see how to log in, because we'll need that code. Secondly, we'll put this one in too, in case we get to this at some point. We also want to have a send password reset email, and it's going to be the same approach. We're just going to print that validation code here instead of actually sending an email. All right, now for one of the most important parts that is relevant with this tutorial is we need a way so that when someone signs up, we can create that user, this guy right here, because nothing is telling it to do that yet. We need a way to do that. And we don't want, our client to do it, the Flutter side to do it, because that's just doesn't seem safe and things might not link up properly. Something could go wrong. So we want a way that anytime a user is created through the auth module, we actually create our own version of a user and connect them together. The great thing is there's an easy way to do this. What we can do is there's something called onUserCreated. And if you're interested in how I found this, just click on the auth config here and you can see all the options we could pass in. So for instance, there's stuff to do with generating an avatar. You could change the image quality of that. You can also, turn off sending a password reset email. You can have something for onUser updated, so not just created, but updated. We can set minimum password lengths, all that kind of stuff. So lots of cool options. But basically the way this one works is there's two parameters. First is session, as usually will be the case in most Serverpod things. Second is going to be the user info. Now user info is what I kind of showed before. It's essentially, let's see if I can get it open. User info, go to definition. Now this is just in the generated code, so it's not the fanciest. Generated, yep. So we can see this has the stuff like their username, their full name, their email, when they were created, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to have access to that when the user is created. Now, in here, what we want to do first of all, just because anything in Serverpod IDs, database column IDs are always nullable because and it kind of makes sense because if you haven't actually saved it yet, you might still want the object, but it doesn't have an ID. But we need to first of all just check to make sure that that is not null, just so the server doesn't crash. So we want to first of all go if UserInfo.id does not equal null, because you'll see ID is technically an int, but it is a nullable int. Then we'll run this stuff. This will never be the case. At least as far as I know, it'll always not be null, but let's just wrap this in it so we don't do anything unsafe. Because if this is null, we have a bigger problem on our hand anyways, and it's going to break. So let's just try not to break it too much. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to go await, which means we actually have to make this async. Async, there we go. We're going to go await user.db, and this is just kind of like the ORM. I'm just giving you a quick little thing about it. Insert row. And we pass in session, so good thing we have access to that. Then we have to pass in the row. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a user object right here. So I'll actually just make it here. We'll call it just u. Actually, I guess we can call it, yeah, we can call it u. No, we can just call it user. And here we'll do user, and we can actually construct one here. Now remember, we need to pass in a bio. We're just going to do an empty string. And we're going to do a UserInfo ID. And of course, here we can get this and just use this right here. Now we will have to say, hey, this is marked as null safe, but we already know it is because we've put this guard around it. Then this is what we pass in here. So it's essentially going to insert a row with this user object in it, and everything will be good. Let's just add some trailing comments here, make it real pretty, and we're off to the races. All right, now we're going to actually, test this out, make sure that this works. And the best way to do that is obviously to go over to Flutter and actually make something to test this out. So let's open up our Flutter main.dart, and let's clear out some things here. We don't need, really any of this stuff. And let's just get rid of this for now. We'll just keep it blank. We are going to do this now. In previous videos, especially in the clean architecture one, you've seen that I've set this up in a pretty nice way using provider or using service locators and all this kind of stuff. But like I said at the start of this tutorial, we're keeping the Flutter stuff super basic, no state management packages and anything like that, because I don't want to waste time on that for you guys who are just trying to learn Serverpod. And you can bring your own packages and make it clean. If you are interested in doing this in block, I have a whole long series on that of how to work with Serverpod with block. Okay, so in our main.dart, we're going to kind of change this a little bit. Instead of just kind of constructing this right here, what we're actually going to do is I'm going to make a late client called client here, and we'll take this code and we're actually going to put it in our main right here, just to do it there. It just seems like a better spot to do it. And what we also want to do is actually set our authentication key manager, because we're using auth. We want to use Flutter authentication key manager like this, and we just have to construct it like that. All right, now the next thing that we want to do is we also need, because we're doing auth stuff, we need access to our session. So we're going to get our session manager here, and we'll just call this session manager. And you'll see right here, this comes from the Serverpod auth Flutter package that we installed. And with our session manager, we are going to set it up right here. Session manager equals session manager. And we need to pass in a caller. And for that, we're actually going to use client.modules.auth. This is so all these things work well together and everything's good. However, the session manager just doing this isn't enough. We actually have to initialize it. So we'll do a session manager.initialize. And this is actually an asynchronous function. So we're going to await it. And now we need to mark this as async. Lastly, in here, we're just going to do the standard, just for safety, we want to do widget flutter bindings dot ensure initialize. Oops, I think something's wrong here. There we go. Ensure initialized. So it's just going to ensure everything's initialized before it starts to do these things, which is something you should do in probably every Flutter app. I don't even know why it doesn't just come like that. Okay, now we're not getting clean things here, so let me just put a size box here so that, because I want to save and I want to see everything nice and clean. We will get rid of this. Now you'll see like there's this thing localhost here. This is actually just something that, oops, I clicked on it twice, I guess. This is something that's part of Serverpod, just a constant. You could, of course, just write localhost in here just like this and it'll be just as good. obviously in a real app, you would have some kind of environment configuration to point to a remote server, all that jazz. But this is fine for now. We'll just do that. Okay, so now we have that set up. What we're going to do now is we're going to make a little login screen. So I'm just going to make very quickly a folder called source, and we're going to make a folder in here called screens, and we're going to make a file called login screen. And let's just make a stateless component to start, stateless widget, and we'll call this login screen. All right, now here we don't want to return a placeholder, we want to return a scaffold. And we're going to actually right away convert this to a stateful widget. Again, doing things in not a way I would normally do on the Flutter side. I'd be using Serverpod here, and I'm sure there'll be a future video like I've done the one for block. There'll be a Serverpod version, but we're just going to use stateful widgets to again keep this simple. Okay, so inside here, let's first of all have an init state, because this is just something that's going to be nice to have based on the way that we're doing things. Inside our init state, we're going to take our session manager. So session manager, you'll see we haven't put this in this file, but it's essentially a global variable, which, yeah, we'd rather use a service locator for this, but this is totally fine because, again, staying away from making it super clean on the Flutter side, we want to talk Serverpod and not worry about that. But we're going to add a listener to this. And the listener is just a function that calls anytime that something with a session changes. So someone logging in, logging out, that kind of thing. And we're just going to call set state whenever that happens so that this rebuilds. Super ugly, I know. Okay. So in here, we have a scaffold. And we're just going to have our body. And we're actually going to just use a builder here to keep it really simple. So that will take a builder context. And right in here, we're just going to have a check, first of all. So first of all, we can check if the session manager.signedin user does not equal null. So this means they already are logged in according to our app. And for this case, let's just return something really simple. Again, because I don't want to deal, normally this would be something I'd handle in the router or something to be like, are they, logged in, all that kind of stuff. But because we're not using a router, because we're keeping things very, very basic, we're basically just going to have this page that says like, oh, welcome, and then give them a page to continue. So we don't have to worry about redirecting them and that kind of stuff. So that is if the signed in user is not null. Now, in the case that they are null, this is where what we really need to worry about now. So right here, we can actually just return. I'll do a center. Then its child is going to be something called the sign in with email button. And this comes from the email auth package that we installed earlier in here. And the first thing here, we need to have a caller. And this we use client.modules.auth, similar to what we did when we set up the session manager. And then there's another function we can take use of, which is on sign in. And the on signed in is just going to be called when a user actually signs in, or technically signs up and then gets signed in through the module. And here we're going to want to do something similar to this, which I know I just breezed over, but we're going to push them to a different page that we don't have yet. All right. So let us actually build this and see what it looks like. And of course, in our main.dart, we need to actually go login screen, and we can make this a constant. All right. Make sure your server is running, and in fact, I'm just going to fully stop it and start it again. And then we want to actually start our Flutter app. I'm going to just do it in iOS. You can, of course, use Mac, you can use Windows, you can use web even if you want. It all works with Serverpod. So I'm going to get that iOS simulator started, and I will be right back. All right, our app is started, and we have this lovely just sign in with email button here. So let's click this. And this is just, built into that package. And in previous videos, I've shown, how you can just not use this and completely create your own UI. But that I really want to focus on, this custom user thing. So we're just using this built-in one. I'm just going to make a username. Really creative. And a nice little password. And we'll go create account. Now this is where we get the validation code. So let's go back to our server, right in our terminal here, and we'll see that something got printed out right here. And that's because simply we were printing it out on the send validation email. So let's paste that guy in. Paste. There we go. Yeah, let's allow paste. There we go. And let's sign in. Here we go. Welcome. There we are. And we're good. Now, this doesn't do anything because we have to actually set that up. But yeah, we have this, more or less working just like signing in. Let me just rebuild the app with the green arrow. So not like a hot restart, but a cold restart. And you'll see Serverpod knows I'm logged in because it's doing all this stuff under the hood to remember my tokens and all that kind of stuff. Now, let's actually see what kind of happened and make sure that what we built works in terms of our custom user. So let's go to dbeaver again. And let's first of all just go to our public table. And let's go to the UserInfo table and click on data. And we'll actually see that this user is created. So it has a user identifier of the email address, a username, full name is null, my email, all this kind of stuff. There's also even an image. I can open this up. And you'll see that Serverpod actually was super nice and gave me this lovely avatar. There we go. It's just my first letter of my name and some random color. But that's kind of cool. Fun little thing that it does under the hood. But most importantly, let's look at our user and hope that everything worked. So we're going to open up user and go to data. And here we have it. We have, although there's not much going on here, we have an ID. That's just the auto incrementing ID. The first one will be 1, 2. And then there's the ID that you'll see there's actually this little link here in this UI that will actually apparently open up that. That's pretty cool. If I can go back, I don't know how to go back, but basically the bio was empty if you missed that because we just set it to be empty to start. But now we have this idea of this sort of one-to-one relationship between these two things. So let's figure out how to actually work with that stuff. So we're very quickly, because I'm trying to stay away from the Flutter side as much as possible, we're going to make a new file. And we'll just call this profile screen.dart. And I'm going to paste a bunch of stuff in here because this will take another 10 minutes to write out and explain. I can just explain it in a couple. So let's just import the things we'll need. Obviously, we need our stateful widget stuff. We're going to import user, and this is our custom user. If we go here, we actually see all the generated code about it and the to JSON and from JSON, stuff we don't have to worry about. Now, we also need to import client. We're going to come back to this in a moment. And I'm just going to get rid of this. I'm just cleaning this up so that we, kind of have a good starting point. It's just very basic, screen UI. All right. And we'll keep those there for a future. Another thing that we need, if we actually go to our login screen, the plan is we're going to have something that's like a dashboard, like okay, I'm logged in sort of thing. And let me make that too. So we'll go to our, close our client for a minute, open up this, make a new file. We'll call this dashboard screen.dart. All right. So this is in some way similar to our login screen, but let's get this sort of knocked out here. So we're just going to make a stateless widget. We're going to call it dashboard screen. And let's just return a scaffold. And let's just give it an app bar that says something like, app bar, title, text, welcome. Okay. And we can make that a const. And let's just go back to our login screen. And basically this redirect, we actually want to redirect to our dashboard screen here. And that should work. And similar here, when someone signs in, we don't have to click a button. So we're just going to also push them to the dashboard screen. So let's just see what that looks like. Open up our little app, click continue. We're brought to this lovely welcome screen. Okay, so on this screen, we're going to make this again a stateful widget. And in our init state, we're going to do exactly the same thing that we did in our login screen. So I'm just going to actually copy that right here. And we'll just put it right here. And we just need to import session manager from our main.dart. And we're good. So this will mean if someone logs out or whatever, like we're going to set state and rebuild. All right. So the first thing I want to do is just handle like if someone got to this screen and they were already logged out, we want to kind of handle, how that would work. So let's actually just do that right at the top here. So we can go if session manager dot signed in user is equal to null. Now, again, normally I'd probably do this in the router. I'd have some kind of protector on this, like logged in people can't be here, redirect me back. But we're not adding a router for this demo. All we're going to do is just put a little thing that says login. I'll bring them to that login screen. All right. Now, we'll get past this. So we've handled the null case. We know it's not null here. So inside here, let's actually get access to our user. This is not our user, our custom user. This is just the UserInfo user, which I want to show, what we can do with that before we get into our custom user. So we can get access to it here. I'm putting this right here so that, because we already know it's not null at this point, it would have already been, short-circuited out there. And we're going to return a scaffold. And instead of saying welcome, we can actually go welcome. We can do user.username, because that is one of the the error is because there's a const there. So now if we actually do this and come back, we should see welcome, my username. We could use full name here, but full name is actually not a field that's required when we signed up. So in theory, we would have to still make a way to capture that, and et cetera, et cetera. So we're just going to use username and everything is good. Then we're going to add some actions here, because we're going to want to have so okay, we have our welcome, everything's good there. Then let's actually do the body of this. So in the body, we're going to have a column. Let's center that column, because why not? And inside this column, we're going to have some children, but let's also make the main axis size min so that it doesn't take up all the space and thus not really actually being centered. Okay, so cool. And then let's have some options here. So let's do something like, what's the first thing? I guess having a way to sign out is probably a good next step so that we can test logging in. We haven't even really test logging in. We've just created an account. So we're going to make an elevated button, and it's just going to say log out and make a const. And let's make sure it looks good. There we go. We got our lovely logout button here. Could be better though. There we are. So for our on pressed here, what we can do is, first of all, this will be asynchronous. So let's go async. And let's just go final success equals await. We're going to use our session manager. And there's just something in here called sign out. All right, cool. We have our sign out. Now this returns a bool, because in theory, I guess something can go wrong. I don't really know what could go wrong with signing out, but we just want to make sure if it was successful, we're going to essentially push them back to that login screen. For this example. So I'm just going to paste this in to save a bit of keystrokes. So we'll just push to our login screen. Again, I'll say it again, this would normally be done in the router or something else, some higher up business logic. Okay, so let's just try doing that. So we have our logout button, and let's click log out, and you'll see it seems like we got logged out. We got success back and we're brought to the screen, but let's actually just rebuild and make sure that we actually got logged out. And it looks like we did. So now here, I can sign in again. So I click I have an account, and let's just make sure logging in works. And assuming I can remember my correct password and sign in, we are good. There's also a forgot password thing. You could try that out if you want. Maybe we'll do it at some point. But yeah, we're brought back and we are good. So that's how you can do logging out. It's really basic. Just session manager.sign out. Now, what if we wanted to let them change their username? Well, let's copy this button just to make things easy, and we'll just do change username, and we'll obviously get rid of all the code in here. So now we have this lovely change username here. So what we want to do now is essentially, when they click it, ask them, hey, what's your new username? A bunch of ways you could do this. You could, of course, have a form and all that kind of stuff. But here's a really easy way. And I'm just going to make a utility function for this. Right in source, actually, let's just make let's make a new folder called utils and a new file called dialogues.dart. I'm pasting this in because this is not even... This is not Serverpod specific at all. It's just very basic Flutter. Basically, it's going to be a function where we can pass in a title of our box and an initial value. It's going to create a text editing controller, and we're going to use the built-in show dialog, passing that context through. We're going to have an alert dialog using the title we passed in and a text field. And then basically what's going to happen is when they click OK, it's going to pop the controller.text. If they click cancel, it's just going to pop null. This could say null just the same, but passing nothing basically will default it to null. And what we actually return is that value, because when you await a show dialog, it's actually going to capture whatever is inside the navigator.pop. So now we can use this very easily. So we'll just go in here and we're just going to do something like final username equals, and we'll await our text prompt. And here we need to pass in the title, and let's just pass in new username. And we can also give it an initial value. And for this, we would of course use our user.username. Like that. Okay, so now this will capture it, and let's just see what that kind of looks like. So change username, we should see this thing, and see it's initially putting it in. I could change it to like this, but we're not actually doing anything with that yet, so let's get that in order. So what we want to do is make sure, first of all, let's make sure the username is not null, because this could be null if I click cancel, right? You see it's a string, nullable string, so we want to say if username does not equal null, and let's also make sure it's not empty, is not empty. Now you'll probably want you might want some other logic here to actually validate the username. Like you might have it set in the configuration that there's a minimum amount of characters and only letters and underscores and whatever. But we're trying to move fast here, and we're not going to worry about that. But feel free to do that. So here, what we want to do is go final success equals await, and we can go client again .modules .auth. So similar to what we're doing up here, that's actually in the session manager, my mistake. Client.modules.auth, and what we can do is actually call we have to go into the user endpoint. So this is just a bunch of generated code, essentially. Endpoint user right here that has some different endpoints, like removing a user image, changing a username, all this kind of lovely stuff. But what we of course want to do is change username, and here we'd pass in that username like that. And this will come back with a Boolean of success or true. And what we want to do is we can go if success, and what we want to essentially do is trigger a refresh of the session. So we'll go refresh session, and triggering that is just a way we can also get this set state to be called, because the session manager has a listener on it. So we'll do that, and then when we change it, our UI should update too. So we'll call myself this and click OK, and we'll see, look, welcome, there's my name there. And if I try and change this again, we should be good. Cool. So that's how you can, change a username. Let's add one more really simple button under all of this, elevated button. And let's just use it to go to our profile screen. And let's look at our profile screen code, which, I kind of just paste in here because it's pretty basic, but we're going to get this started. So this is going to be the first part where we actually work with our end user, because now we want to actually show the bio. This is not, this is something that, isn't part of that user, built-in user object. This is our own custom user. So what we need to actually do is make a new endpoint here, because this is our own data. This isn't, already generated by Serverpod. So inside server, we'll go into endpoints. We see there's this lovely example endpoint. It's all good. I'll copy it. We're going to make a new endpoint called user endpoint .dart. Let's paste that in. I'm going to get rid of a bunch of comments here, and we're going to rename this user endpoint. And it extends endpoint, which is like Serverpod's lovely endpoint class. And we're going to change this. What we want is essentially a way to get the logged in user info. So what we're going to do is, I like to call this, I'm going to call this me, because in our code then we're going to be able to essentially go, like I have here, client.user.me. So client being our API client, user being the module name, which is what we're making right now, the endpoint name rather, and then me being the name of the function here. So we're going to call it me, and there's not going to be any parameters. Now you'll see we're going to pass session in. Session always gets passed in, but you'll see that we don't ever pass this in from Flutter side. Serverpod does that under the hood, but we need to have that as the first parameter. If you don't have that and you're pulling your hair out, that's probably why, because you don't have that. It won't actually generate a proper route for you, and you'll be wondering what's going on. Okay, so here what we can do is we're going to, in this endpoint, whenever someone hits it, we're going to try and get our user info. And we can get this by going await the session.authenticated. So this is a future, that's why we're awaiting it, that is actually going to return authentication info. And maybe we should call this authentication info, just to keep it really clear. Okay, now in here, we want to check if authentication info does not equal null. Then we can actually try and get our user. So what we'll do is we'll go final user equals, and we want to await this as well, because it's an asynchronous call. We're talking to a database. So we'll get user. We got to import this. User.db.find first row. And first we have to pass in session. The second parameter is we want a where clause. We actually want to like get a specific user. So we can essentially write it like this. We can take the row and we can go where row.userinfoid.equals, and that will take our authentication info and go .user ID, which is just part of what authentication info has. And if we go like this and click this, we can just take a better look at what it is. There's a user ID, there's scopes. I guess that's it. It's pretty basic, but that's enough for us to actually, get the user back, which is great. Now, ideally, our me is also going to return not just the user, the bio and the stuff that we custom made, but it would be nice if it also included the user info as well, the built-in one. And technically it will. If we actually do this now, you'll see what I mean, and we will get it back, but we'll only be getting a reference. We're going to be getting like an ID of the user, which means the client would have to make another API call to basically get the up-to-date information. But what's cool about relationships in Serverpod is we can actually tell it, and the reason it's good to tell when we want to do this is if it did it automatically all the time, your SQL queries would be very under-optimized. But this is a case where we want to do a join. We want to be like, hey, give me also this data that's relating to it. So for this, we can actually do another thing called include. And for include, we have to use whatever this model is. We go user.include. And inside user.include, we want to take user info, right? So our include method will have any references to foreign relationships, in this case, just one, user info. And in order to include this, we actually have to go user info, and we got to actually call .include. Let's actually make sure that gets imported, .include. And if you were working on a model that had a deeper relationship, technically in here you could also be like where tracks are whatever, track.include. It can go as deep as you ultimately want. So what we're telling by doing this is, hey, give me that user, but also include the user info data that essentially we have in our user.spy. So we're actually going to have this pre-populated with whatever is live in the database at the time of this query. And we have our user. What do we want to do? Well, we want to return it right at the end of this. And yeah, we need to also change this. This is going to return a user, but it's technically a nullable user, because if you're not logged in and someone calls this, we might just get back nothing. And that means at the very end of this function, right here, let's just return null. So if this didn't work, we get null back. Technically, this could be null as well, but that still conforms because we have null. All right, so we have our first custom endpoint. Almost an hour in, first custom endpoint. That's great. And what do we need to do now? Well, because we made a code change, we haven't made a database change, we made a code change that has something new in it. So you can work with Serverpod in an existing already generated, function and make some changes to your logic and not actually run the generator. But anytime for endpoints, you're either creating something new, modifying its name, or changing its shape in general. So what it returns, what its parameters are, we have to run the generator so that the client can actually generate its code to build that API bridge. So we can just go Serverpod generate. I don't have to do a database migration. We didn't change anything there yet, but this will just generate and make stuff work. And let's just run our server again. I can get rid of apply migrations. This out. So we're going to go back to our profile screen. And in fact, I'm just going to close everything and open up our profile screen. And let's open up the user endpoint again, just because I might reference some things with it. And yeah, so here we have just a basic, stateful widget, and it has an init state. And I'm calling this function called load. And inside load is what we're going to do some magic stuff with. So we're going to import client, and I'll just remove this so we can kind of see this happen, but we can actually go client.user. So you'll see, hey, that actually got auto-generated. We made that. That's kind of cool. And then we can call .me. And you'll see we're not actually passing anything through, even though the function itself seems like we should be passing something through. This isn't actually a reference directly to this. This is a reference to that client bridge. So you'll see it actually like generated this code for us and says what it's going to return, and everything's awesome. So we got our data, and then you'll see I actually have a user that's nullable here, and we're actually going to set state with that. So whether it comes back null or not, we're just going to set state, and that way we get a rebuild with the most recent data. And what are we doing in here? Well, kind of the same kind of things. We're first of all checking if the user is null or the user info is null. We're just going to send back a circular progress indicator because, like, more often than not, it likely means like it's still loading. This isn't a great solution because something could have gone wrong and we need to handle that, but we're not for simplicity's sake. Now, user info, we're getting just by going user.userinfo. We know it's not null at this point, so I'm just putting these here. That way we don't have to keep putting these, exclamation marks everywhere. And then I'm making something called image URL, which you'll see image URL, which is baked into the user info, is a nullable string, but I'm just going to fall back to a string, so we don't have to handle a null case. It'll always be, it might be empty, but it won't be null. Then in here, we just have a single child scroll view, some padding, we have a column, we check if the image is not empty, we just use an image.network. Awesome, and we get that 200 by 200 image, and we're putting some border radius around it, and everything's great. Then we're checking if the username isn't null, which it really shouldn't be, but according to Serverpod's data structure, like it can be, because I guess the user, until it's saved in the database, maybe it doesn't have a username. And I think you can configure Serverpod also not to even have usernames. It could just be email as the primary thing, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, so we do this, and we're just going to show the username. Then userinfo.fullname. Now, I'm going to comment this one out just so we can come back to it and really, appreciate it when it's ready. Okay, we've restarted our server. We'll just restart Flutter. And we'll come back, and we'll click continue, and we'll go to my profile. And here we have that lovely picture. We have our name. And now full name, that's not set. We don't... it exists technically, but it's null, so it's going exactly as we want. But let's also put in this bio one. Now this isn't going to make a change at all, right? Because our bio is already empty. But if we go back to dbeaver and of course find the correct place to do this, so let's actually make our bio. Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong. Yeah, I'm in the wrong spot. I want to be going to public user. Oh, it's because we double-clicked on that thing, and now I don't know how to go back. How do we do this? Maybe if I just close it and reopen. Yes. So let's actually give myself a bio. This is my bio. And although I haven't tried this in this, there's probably a way to actually run this query. Apply cell change. Yeah. I'm assuming that is what will do it. It doesn't look like it. All right, the shortcut was just Command S, and then I even closed it and reopened it, and we are good. This is my bio, and that of course won't live update in our app. We don't have any sockets or anything happening to do that, but let's just do a rebuild and just see if our UI is working as expected. And there we go, my profile. This is my bio. So that's pretty cool. We're getting back, even though in this we technically aren't using, in our previous screen, just to kind of explain what's going on here, we had. We were making use of the stuff from our session manager, sessionmanager.signedInUser. And that's really easy to do because that's just kind of built into the auth module. But if you pay attention here, we're not even using the session manager here. We're actually getting the data by hitting me, which gives us our own user object back, but our own user object actually has the user info within it. So this is great. We can still get access to those things with one API call, and everything's great. All right, let's quickly, hopefully, make a settings page because we need a way to actually update our bio. So let's go to, let's close our client library here, and let's make a new screen. And we'll just start with a stateless widget called settings screen. And we'll just return a scaffold for now. And we need a way to get here, so let's go to our profile screen and let's actually, in our action bar, yeah, I already kind of had it stubbed in here. We want to actually push to our settings screen. So just simple push, cool. And let's just make sure that works. We have a little gear and we can click it and we can go back just with that. We should probably have an app bar just to make it easier. and spell it right. There we go. We're getting to our lovely settings page. Okay, in our body, we're going to do some other stuff. And this is where you might have, all your settings, right? Being able to change your username, but we've already seen that. Being able to, update your image, your bio, whatever. We're only going to worry about bio for sake of simplicity because that is really what I want to show here. So in our body, let's first of all just have a list view because you probably would want to have multiple things in here. And inside the children here, we'll start with a card, we'll have a child with a list tile. And our list tile is essentially going to have we'll use a subtitle that is just text of bio, just to tell people what it is. And its title is going to be something. We'll just stub it in right now. And let's just save that and just make sure that it looks kind of pretty. There we go. So we have our bio there. Now on this screen, we need to do something very similar to what we did on the profile screen in a really messy way. And again, just doing this in the most basic non-state management way to really drive home, what's important. So this is very similar. We're going to have our init state and our load function, and we're just going to call that same endpoint we did before. We're going to call the this sort of thing, which means we need a user, nullable user here, and let's just import client from main and import user. Okay, so now that we have that, this will get loaded, and we'll want to also do something in our scaffold. Let's actually wrap this in a builder, and we can go if user equals null. Let's just return a size box or something because we don't want to give settings to a null user. That would be ridiculous. And then in here, instead of this, we can actually go user.bio. And we're getting that because I think because this technically could be null, but it can't. We're already saying no, we're returning out of it. So we can just do that safely. And let's just go max lines 1 overflow text overflow dot ellipsis. Okay, and let's put a const there so it looks prettier. Come on, man. There we go. And now we should have, this is my bio, and this will just wrap to one line so it doesn't take up too much room. Maybe not the best UI for a bio, but again, doesn't matter. Then we're going to add a trailing, and we'll just have maybe a text button, and its child is going to be text just saying edit, and it needs an onPressed event, which is going to be asynchronous, so we'll get that ready. I can do it. No, I can't. All right. So we have this lovely edit button now. Okay, so how do we get this? Well, we want to, again, kind of like use that prompt thing that we did to actually get, a new bio back. So we're just going to put this here. We're going to get our lovely text prompt. And that's just that lovely function we made here that, essentially lets us get a value back really easily, and change bio. And we're going to set its initial value to that bio. And let's just click edit. So there we have, this is my bio. Cool. Then, similarly, we want to essentially check if the bio isn't null, if bio does not equal null, because it could be null. Then we will allow it to be empty. Maybe someone's erasing their bio, so we'll allow it to be empty. That's fine. Then we're going to need to essentially call another API endpoint. All right, so let's make that endpoint. We need an endpoint essentially to update your bio. So let's go and what this is going to do, it's going to return the user again. So we'll keep the same kind of shape here, but it's going to be called update bio. And inside update bio, instead of just the session itself, we are going to also require a string called bio to be passed in. All right, now we're going to get that user info again and, do all that stuff. So let's just copy that authentication info. I'm going to copy most of this, and we'll make a couple changes to it. Okay, so we'll have this. So for this, because we're just trying to get the we're just trying to get the user back here. Actually, you know what? This is a good time to do a refactor, because this is something that, we might be calling in multiple places, basically getting the user back with, this sort of stuff, all that kind of lovely things. So let us make this a little more reusable. So we're going to create something. It's still going to be within. Actually, this can be totally outside of our endpoint, just so we don't have to worry about getting auto-generated. But we're going to call this future. It's going to be future. It's going to return a user nullable, and we'll just call it. I'm using an underscore so that it can't be accessed outside of this file, just to keep everything safe. And essentially, what we're going to do is we're just going to take that code that we put in here, and really, I mean all of it. I'm pretty sure. And we'll have to make this asynchronous. That way, what we can do up here is instead of doing all this, we're basically just going to go and return await that right there. And we have to just pass the session through. So cool. That's something we can use. Now we can also use the same thing in our update bio, at least to get started. We can go final user equals get that user. Right? And we can go if user does not equal null, we'll do something. Otherwise, at the very end, we'll return null if we don't actually get in here. And then right in here, the main difference is we want to update the bio. So all we really have to do here is we can go await user.db.update row. And in here, we're going to pass in session, and then we actually have to pass in the row. So what we're actually going to take is our user here, but we're going to go user, and we're going to go .copy with bio. And this is essentially more or less what we can return. However, this won't actually add the add this lovely include stuff, because this is actually just going to return a new version of this. So really what we want to return is something already doing that. So I'm actually just going to make something called u equals this. So we'll actually have it here. This is what we're going to update to the database. And what we'll do is we'll just make this like updated user equals this. And what I actually want to do here is, in fact, we're just going to run this, await, and then we're going to return u. So it's going to return this updated version, because the updated one will already have the includes and stuff, rather than having to copy this again. So there, it's just going to basically do that. It's going to update the row, and we should be good. So let's save that. We have to run our generator because we did make some. We made a new function here, and we'll go back to our settings screen while that's going, and we can go. We want to say, let's just go final u equals. Actually, yeah, let's call it updated user. Is going to be equal to await client.user.update bio. Look, it's right there, update bio, and it's asking us to pass in the bio, and because we use nice names, it auto-populated it for us. And you'll see this comes back as a user, and we just want to check, if updated user does not equal null, then let's just call that load function again, right? And our load function is just basically what kind of like refreshes it. We could probably the better way to do this is the more efficient way would be just to set the state with our updated user instead of calling load again, because we already kind of just made an API call. So we'll do it that way. Let's make sure our server is running, and hopefully this will all work. I'm just going to do a full rebuild just because the client code updated and stuff. Just play it safe. Continue my profile. Let's make sure this still works because we did make a change to that, right? We did that nice little refactor to have a reusable thing. Let's go to settings. This is still working. Let's go to edit. That's still working. And let's just do this, and go like this. And we see it updated. And that was just because we set the state with whatever came back. Now, let's just double check from a database point of view that it updated. And you could, of course, check in DB Beaver or whatever you're using, but I will do it through Flutter. And we'll see, look there. There's my bio. There's my bio. Now, one thing you'll notice if you take this code and actually, make the change here, you'll see it fixes. If I go back here, it's still going to be like that because we're not really doing state in a proper way. We could get around this, by when we push to the profile screen. In fact, let's see if we can get around this. We can actually await going to the settings screen, and then after we can essentially call our load function again. This is not super optimal because we're kind of making an API call that we don't need to make. Really this should be done, using something like Block or Riverpod so that everything, is good. But I think this will actually fix it. So let's just go here. This is also not efficient because what if you didn't make a change? We're just kind of lazily making an API call. Let's go there. We did. So I fixed the state management. That's great. Don't do it this way though. Do it if you're following along, sure, it's fine, just to make your app feel a little more reactive. But this is why things like Riverpod, Block, Signals, like a million other great things, change notifiers, whatever, exist because you don't really want to keep your data within a stateful component. But this was not a Flutter tutorial. It was a Serverpod tutorial, which had some Flutter in it, obviously. And I really hope you liked watching this. My goal is to make some more videos like this that, sort of tack on specific topics of Serverpod. I want to get into doing stuff with sockets again with the new, whatever's changed there. I haven't done anything on logging or caching. We haven't done that much on image uploading. That's something I wanted to cover in this video, but there's actually a bug right now in 2.0 that I have. If you're interested, you can look on their GitHub repository because I flagged something about it today. It's not that images aren't working, it's just the change image profile built-in thing. There's something broken there. That will probably be patched in 2.0.1 and is not really critical. But I just wanted to point out that fun fact that if you go on their GitHub, you'll see me, pointing out a potential problem and a potential solution for it. Thanks for watching. Give this a like, subscribe, share with your friends, and we'll see you in the next one.